All right, question and answer time part 2. I tried to pick questions this time that seem to kind of fall into a theme or kind of repeat follow-up questions of previous ones. So some of the questions here might fall into the same category. I'm still experimenting with this format, so we'll see how this goes, and if this is a little too repetitive, then the next time I do this I will mix it up a little more, but we'll see. Question 1. Dang, I keep coming up with questions. Anyways, what are your thoughts on the Angry Video Game Nerd movie being made? Do you have hope or caution? Are you going to review it when it comes? Do you have any comment on how he got the movie funded? I guess technically there are a few questions in there, but that's fine. My thoughts on the movie being made? Now, keep in mind, I don't know anything about why James Rolfe is doing this. I haven't really heard anything from him about why he wanted to do this. I'm sure that's out there. I just haven't had a chance to look at it. So this is all coming from instinct. I think he's doing this first because James Rolfe likes to make things. I think he likes to make movies and he likes to make shows. This isn't the first time he's done a movie. But second to that, I think it seems to me that the reason he is making this movie is for the fans. I can't imagine any other reason why he would be doing something like this. This isn't something that he has to do. And also, the audience for this is probably going to be very specific. Obviously, if it's an Angry Video Game Nerd movie, it is being made for Angry Video Game Nerd fans. I can't imagine any other just like general audience member jumping into this. So I like the fact that he's making this movie because it seems like a nice thing to do for people who like the Angry Video Game Nerd. And also just to show that James Rolfe isn't just a YouTube personality. James Rolfe is an entertainer, and he's a filmmaker. And he's very good at both of those things, I think. So I'm curious about it, whether, to the question, do I have hope or caution? It's not, I can't imagine this going really wrong. Seems just to be like sort of a celebration of this character that he came up with and that he has done for so many years now. I can't imagine how this could be like, oh, I have caution, like this is going to be bad, or even that I have hope. I just think that it's going to be something that I'm going to watch and have a good time seeing because I'm a fan of that character. The only hope that I have is that it's funny, but if his Angry Video Game Nerd reviews are any indication, I think it's probably going to be funny. I am going to review it when it comes out, just because I think a lot of people are just going to expect me to. But I tend to look at comedies differently than any other genre, so it's probably going to be a little different. But yeah, I'll review it when it comes out. As to how he got the movie funded, I don't really have a whole lot to say about that. I'm not entirely sure what is being asked in that. If maybe not, but if you're asking if I think he did anything unethical or anything like that with regard to funding the movie, no, he basically did what I do. He asked people for money. Sometimes that's really all you can do, especially when you're funding a film and you don't have any income, like the studio's not backing this or anything. You have to rely on the generosity of others. And this is something that I've come to learn very well when my own financial situation became a nightmare. One of the things that I want to do this year with this Confused Matthew thing that I've created is I want to try to review every single major summer release that comes out in 2013. It's something that I've never done in the history of Confused Matthew. I've never reviewed every major film that comes out in one particular summer. I would not be able to do that were it not for the financial generosity of the people who watch my reviews. And so I understand why he's funding the movie this way, and so to however much that answers your question, I hope that answers your question. So Matt, with all these remakes, reboots, and reimaginings, would you honestly think it would be a good idea for Warner Brothers to redo the Matrix sequels, and would you be interested in seeing them if they did decide to actually do it? I don't know if redoing the sequels is something that I've said in the past would be a good idea. I think there was a time there, just shortly after the sequels came out, and they were such a disaster, such a cinematic disaster, that I thought they should just do this over again. I think the time for that has passed. I think that there are precedents in cinema now to go back and redo a franchise. I'm not aware of any precedent whatsoever to where you just redo the sequels. Like, the first film is the same, and the second two were made 10 years later, or this would have to be at the least 12 years later. I don't think that's gonna work. I can't imagine how that would work. Everybody's gotten older, people have moved on. I think that there was a window there to where they could have redone the sequels, and I think that that window has closed. The best that they could possibly do is just reboot the franchise entirely, make another Matrix film, and then do better sequels on the back of that new film. But even then, I'm very, very skeptical about that. I don't think there's much of a demand for a reboot of The Matrix. I think The Matrix was good enough, the original one, to where you don't really need to do it again. If they did that, yeah, I would be curious, I would be interested, maybe it would all work out for the best. I have to believe that those sequels would be leaps and bounds better than the original sequels. But to try and redo the sequels now, where either they would have to get everybody back who is a little bit too old to be doing this, even well, Keanu Reeves is pretty ageless, but everybody else, it just wouldn't fit right. Or the worst case scenario is that they recast, which I think would be detrimental. I don't see how they could do that. If they did, and they actually pulled it off, wow, that would blow my mind. But if they ended up redoing the sequels, which I don't think they will, it would definitely be setting a very interesting precedent one way or the other, to where, wow, we can actually do this going down the line, and maybe we can do this with other sequels that weren't that successful, or we should never do this again. Regarding your favorite movies, you praise certain elements that enhance their narrative, like Christian's foreboding of the tragedy or the separation between the real and fantasy worlds in Pan's Labyrinth. Have you considered that the narrative strategies in 2001 or No Country for Old Men carry a comparable purpose or were in keeping with the author's works? The wording of this question is a little bit complicated. I'm not entirely sure I understand what you're asking, but I think I might have an idea. Truth be told, in all honesty, I do not see any strategy whatsoever in the creation of 2001: A Space Odyssey as far as its screenplay goes. Certainly nothing that would enhance the narrative. I mean, with the possible exception of Hal, which I've praised numerous times. With regard to No Country for Old Men, this is the one case where I would say maybe there was a bit of a strategy there. Maybe they were trying to do something that would enhance the narrative by making Tommy Lee Jones's character and the crazy psychopathic killer character sit on ass and look at a blank television screen for 10 minutes and waste our time. At least it felt like it was wasting my time. Maybe there was a strategy there. It was a bad one if it was. I have zero tolerance for that kind of pretentious shit. I know everybody knows that by now. I don't really need to go into it again. But if that is a strategy, I find that kind of thing, the kind of thing that goes into things like 2001: A Space Odyssey, No Country for Old Men, Being John Malkovich, just these shitty films. If that is a strategy, it's the easiest and least creative strategy in the world. Do as little as possible, write as little as possible, and just let it, absorb the minds of the audience. Anybody could do that. I could do that with random stock footage. In fact, I have. with regard to the kinds of elements that enhance the narrative of things like Moulin Rouge and Pan's Labyrinth, that is very different. Those films were very difficult to write. Not necessarily the story of Moulin Rouge, because it's based on so many familiar things, but how that story was presented to the audience and the merging of the fantasy and the reality had to be done very specifically. And at least as far as I'm concerned, it was, and it was done very well. Pan's Labyrinth, you have two completely different, almost two completely different genres going on in the same film, and you have to keep track of what the tone is for each. That's extremely difficult. So if there is a strategy going into things like 2001 or No Country for Old Men, I don't believe it's comparable. I think that is the most overused cop-out strategy, if it can't even be called a strategy, that I've ever seen in film. As for being in keeping with the author's works, it can't really be said one way or another whether or not 2001 is in keeping with Arthur C. Clarke, because both the film and the book were written at the same time. I've never been a fan of Arthur C. Clarke. I understand why people like his writing. It's really not for me. I have read the 2001 series now, and I'm not a fan. But the story in the 2001 novel is very different from 2001 the movie, in that there was a story. With regard to Cormac McCarthy, I actually very much regret even bringing Cormac McCarthy up in my review. I said a few negative things about his work in the epilogue of my No Country for Old Men review, and if I had it to do over again, I wouldn't. I don't think that really fit very well with the review. I don't even really understand why I was bringing that into it in the first place. I guess it was to say that this wasn't entirely the Coen brothers' fault, because they kind of fell for Cormac McCarthy's bullshit, but what Cormac McCarthy does in literature is very, very different than what the Coen brothers do in film. And to try and tie in his literary works and say how that was affecting the adaptation, I wish I hadn't done that, because I'm not a fan of Cormac McCarthy's writing, has nothing to do with the film. So that's actually something that I kind of regret. Was it true to the author's work? Was No Country for Old Men, the film, true to Cormac McCarthy's book? No, I actually think the book was better, even though I thought the book was shit. There were characters in there. There was dialogue in there. I didn't like it. But no, I don't think it was very good. I think it was a very strange thing for the Coen brothers to do. They're so good at storytelling, so good at dialogue. You would never know that based on this film, because there is no dialogue, there are no characters, it's just a bullshit film. But once again, just my opinion. This one is very simple. What do you think of the Walking Dead series? I am very impressed with the Walking Dead series. And it's really interesting what the series has evolved into. I don't remember season 1 very well, because in my opinion, like when I first started watching the show in season 1, it was just an entertaining television show. And I'm like, okay, wow, there's zombies, there's people shooting at them. You got into a little bit of the meat of the story when Rick met up with the group, but it was more an entertainment show than not. And it was really just getting these people into situations, watching them shoot and stab at zombies, and then getting them out of those situations. Season 2 changed the hell out of that. Season 2 is where this really went from an entertaining show on television that I watched to be entertained to actual art. What they did in that season, most especially with the Sophia storyline, where that began and especially where that ended, absolutely blows my mind. It's the best thing that they've ever done on the show. It surprised me, it moved me, and just it was amazing. That's when this show really became a piece of art. And I know a lot of Walking Dead fans, they kind of got down on season 2, like, oh, there isn't enough action, there isn't enough zombies, it's just the people on the farm. But that's kind of the point. This has really evolved into a character-driven show, and watching these people make decisions and seeing how they deal with losing things and not knowing where to go from here and not knowing what the right thing to do is. Season 2 defined this show, as far as I'm concerned. And they have a lot of big shoes to fill in Season 3. I like Season 3. It is kind of a combination of the two now, where you have a lot of deep, interesting character stuff going on, but you also have the more entertainment aspect. And I think that kind of comes from some of the complaints I saw coming up about Season 2 not being action-oriented enough. So Season 3 is good, but Season 2 is really where this show shines the most. So with regard to Walking Dead, I'm actually a big fan. And now for an opposite reaction. Have you ever watched Game of Thrones? If so, what are your thoughts? My thoughts are Game of Thrones sucks. I know I'm in absolutely the minority view on that, but I have tried to watch that show. I can only speak to what I have seen, which is a lot of the first season. I can't really remember where I stopped. I didn't stop that early. It is the most bland, boring, generic thing I've ever seen in my life. I do not understand the popularity of this. You're in a fantasy world, which isn't a fantasy world. You have very banal and boring things going on here. Terrible characters, not even remotely realized. Everyone is so interchangeable. I kept forgetting who everybody was. Like, I would mistake one character for another because every character is exactly the same. It's terrible. They're completely interchangeable. The stories, I mean, I'm constantly asking who cares about these people. I don't care about any of these people. I don't care if this place gets taken over, if this guy gets his land back. There was a kind of semi-interesting story going on there with this one guy and his sister who was trying to rope in these other people to create an army to go and take their stuff back. That one particular character had potential, but it wasn't enough to pull me through all the terrible. And that's just with the show. I tried reading the book and it was 100 times worse because when you're watching the series, God, at least I can see these people and kind of differentiate between them. When you're reading a book and you can't see anybody, every character is exactly the same. Game of Thrones sucks. Not to be too disrespectful to the fans because, I mean, obviously, this show is doing something right. And, if you want to flood the comment section with, well, you obviously just don't understand the work, and how can you say that these people are interchangeable? You don't think the Walking Dead people are interchangeable, but you think this is interchangeable? That's fine. I'm not, once again, I'm not speaking with any authority. I'm just expressing my opinion. I understand it's the minority view. I understand that there are fans out there that are fiercely loyal to this series. And defending that series against people like me, there aren't very many people like me. That's absolutely fine. But this person asked, and that's my answer. What are some of your favorite bands/albums, and what are your favorite concert memories, if any? The concert memory one is something that I want to go into. With regard to my favorite bands and albums, I've talked about this a little bit in another video, just to give a really quick recap because there are so many. I'm a huge fan of Led Zeppelin. I'll just name them off real quick. Aerosmith, Guns N' Roses, Queen, Pink Floyd, The Rolling Stones, The Who, Jethro Tull, Wolfmother, Rival Sons, The Parlor Mob, Them Crooked Vultures, a lot of rock, not gonna lie. I love the genre. And those are representatives of the best in that genre, in my opinion. With apologies to anything that I left out, because I'm sure I left something out. AC/DC, to a certain extent. I don't think they're as good as any of the bands I named. Albums, The Who's Tommy is amazing. Exile on Main Street by the Rolling Stones, very moving, very touching, very, very good. Use Your Illusions 1 and 2, comparable. They're great albums. Rocks by Aerosmith that really kind of defined their sound. And with regard to Pink Floyd, I'm actually a fan of Atom Heart Mother. I think that's one of their best albums, and it's the one that, according to the band, you should never listen to. But I completely disagree with that. I think the album is great. But as for the concert memory, This is one that I always will think about for the rest of my life with great fondness. I was going to see Aerosmith for the first time. This was in 2001, and their album Just Push Play had just come out. So they were touring, and it turns out that they would be touring many, many years after this. But I didn't know how long they were going to tour. So I was going to go to this concert with my friend at the time, and she was a big fan of Aerosmith, and I was going to go with also my brother and his girlfriend. Well, my brother and his girlfriend split up just before the concert, and he actually got together with my friend, and so those two were together, and I'm like, I don't have anybody to go with me anymore. And so I'm like, who do I want to take to this concert? Well, there was this girl that I knew in high school. This was about 3 or 4 years prior to this, who I always had kind of a thing for, but we never got together. I wasn't really good at getting together with people in those days. I didn't really know how to approach that situation, didn't really know how to talk to girls, typical teenage stuff. So nothing ever happened between she and I, and when I tried to make things happen, it was always very unsuccessful, and it was very awkward, and I liked this girl so much that I found it very difficult to be myself around her. And I always wished that we could just have this normal moment, and I could just take this person out, and we could just have a nice time, and everything would be cool. Well, I thought about her when I was like, who do I want to take to this concert? And I ran into her out of sheer happenstance just before, and I asked, would you like to go? And she said, sure. It wasn't a date or anything, and we never really got together after this, but I took her to the concert, and we really had a genuinely good time. And I finally got that moment of, I'm just taking this person out and having a nice time with her. And it sounds like it doesn't really sound like a great seminal moment in anybody's life, but for me, that was really amazing for me, and I will always remember that with great fondness. This one actually isn't a question, and I've actually responded to things like this in the comments, but this is just something that I want to clear up. Matt, I have to disagree with you heavily on the whole games are just now really getting stories bit. Great stories have been part of games and the focus of many genres since even the NES days. You have your adventure games like Hotel Dusk and Phoenix Wright, your RPGs, primarily Japanese ones, like the Persona series and Final Fantasy series, and even puzzle games like Professor Layton have a pretty wonderful story. I think you're too new to games to be making claims like that. I went back and I listened to the Q&A that I did before. I couldn't find a part where I said games are just now getting stories. If I did say that, I don't think that's quite what I meant. Sometimes I'm not particularly clear with off-the-cuff stuff. Yes, games have had stories since the NES days, you're absolutely correct. I didn't really mean to suggest otherwise. Donkey Kong had a story. Giant gorilla or whatever Donkey Kong is kidnaps a princess, and this guy has to go save her. That is a story. Final Fantasy VII, which is the only Final Fantasy game that I have ever played, had a very rich story. I actually thought the story was a little bit better than the gameplay. And I'm a huge fan of Phoenix Wright, which is nothing but dialogue, which does pertain to a story. I think if I did... I don't remember saying that. If I did say that, I think what I mean is games have reached a point where it's kind of easy. I don't want to say easier. There's more of a budget to have a story, like something in BioShock, where you can sell a game that has a very rich story that's actually teaching you something about a bitter old lady's terrible philosophy very well. The philosophy of Ayn Rand was implemented in the gameplay. You can either accept objectivism and just be a horrible person and kill little children so that you can get more power because they're worthless, or you can be a good person and you can just take Ayn Rand's philosophy and throw it in the toilet where it belongs and actually help these children and be a better person as a result. And maybe you're not going to be as powerful as you could in the game, but you've done the right thing. That kind of a thing, you could see the genesis of it in things like, not necessarily exactly the same, but you could see it in things like JRPGs and things of that sort. But the stories of earlier video games, while some of them were very good, a lot of them were really just at the service of the gameplay. Sonic the Hedgehog didn't really have that good a story. I mean, there's a guy who's creating, turning little woodland creatures into robots and capturing them in these capsules, and in order to save them, you have to run really fast. Not really connecting very well on the story front, but the gameplay was really good. But then, yeah, you also had things like, Hotel Dusk, and you have things like Phoenix Wright, and they are conveying a story very, very well. You are correct that stories have always been there in video games. I guess what I'm saying is, video games that have good stories are a bit more commonplace now. When you're talking about something like particularly Hotel Dusk, it's a very, very narrow road to be talking about. So I hope that helps clarify the distinction. And one other thing that I want to clear up, I'm not new to video games. I have been playing video games since I was 7 years old. I'm new to thinking about video games as an art form, but being new to games, no, I have been playing video games my whole life. So hopefully this clears up a couple of issues that have taken place in whatever it was that I said. You said once you don't like a piece of art if it's entirely subjective, or at least heavily dependent on subjective interpretation. What are your opinions on other art forms where that is more integral? Music, for example. Many artists take the line, "What does this music mean to you?" which is taken to mean that the music may mean different things to different people. Does this diminish the musical experience for you? Absolutely not at all. My philosophy on things like music and video games is extremely different than my philosophy on literature and film and television. My philosophy with regards specifically to music is exactly the opposite of how I feel about movies. I don't give two shits what a song is about, because that song is never going to be about anything more than what it means to me. Which is, I think, kind of a natural thing, because, I mean, if you think about the earlier genres of music, or the earlier days of music, of what we now consider to be classical, what was Beethoven's Fifth about? It had no lyrics, it was just the music. And that's kind of the philosophy that I carry into music of today. Like, you could be writing a song like Imagine, or you could be writing a song about Dude Looks Like a Lady, and I don't really care what the message is of either of these songs. The only thing I care about is the music good? Turns out the music is good for both. And having a message in a song and having something that the song is about is all well and good, but that's not really what I look for. I think that's why I gravitate so much towards the rock genre, because the rock genre has never been particularly good lyrically. But it's not really about that. I mean, you could write a song like Janie's Got a Gun that does kind of have sort of a message in there. Or you could just write a song about having sex and doing drugs. I don't care. When I think about music, I do think about what it means to me. There's a Queen song called Seaside Rendezvous. I have no idea what that song is about, and I've heard it a million times, but it will never mean anything more to me than this time in my life where I fell in love with this girl who later went on to break my heart. But that song will always remind me of that young love that I had. And that's the beauty of music. You know, you hear a song, it's like capturing time in a bottle. And whenever you want, you can just open that bottle up and it's going to be right there. I can't think of any other genre that can really do that. Music is amazing to me. It's a huge part of my life. And to try and think about music in terms of what it means to the artist, Like, or that's why I don't like singer-songwriters, because it's all about them. I think music should speak to the person the audience that it's being played for. I think it's the playing that is ever so much more important than just the technical specifics of it. And some of the best rock albums weren't perfect. I mean, there will be cues that the musicians will be off by just a little bit. Like that's the Who did this often. As Aerosmith progressed, their music actually got more and more mixed, and perfecting their sound on a soundboard. And that, to me, isn't really... I understand that all albums do this, but to the extent to which that happens now, I don't like it when it sounds too perfect. I like it when it sounds organic, like you're in almost like you're in a garage listening to a garage band. That, to me, that's what speaks to me. So it's interesting. When you look at my philosophy of music, it's the exact opposite of my philosophy of movies, and just make of that what you will. Here's a question that I couldn't pass up. What do you think of the Nostalgia Critics' Does Romeo and Juliet Suck video? Here's what I think about the Nostalgia Critics' Does Romeo and Juliet Suck video. I thought it was brilliant. I was very impressed by it. I think of all the videos that he's done, that one was the best. And it's just this little video. But I think that video could be shown in literature class. I really do. I think that he nailed absolutely what it is that you're supposed to be getting from Shakespeare, which is something that I did not understand when I was younger. When I was in my high school English class, I did not understand Shakespeare, and I did not understand Romeo and Juliet. And it took a very long time for me to realize that, yes, this was not about true love conquering all. This wasn't about a great relationship and a great lover meeting this girl, and their love, charges through all the... So it wasn't about that. It was about almost a very naive kind of love, but which is what it's supposed to be when you're young. This is the great thing about Shakespeare. Humanity never changes. We still have things like this. We still have people who are like, this is my one love and we're going to be together forever, and I can't even really describe to you what it is that makes me love this person so much that I know automatically that this is always going to work out. And sometimes it does. Like I said, sometimes it does. Most of the time, it doesn't work out that way. Most of the time, you're just young and you're feeling these things for the first time, and that can actually lead you to make some very bad decisions, which is why people typically make very bad decisions when they're young, because they're feeling everything for the first time. So, to answer your question very directly, like I said, when I was younger and I was just reading this stuff for the first time, I did not understand Shakespeare. And I know that this is kind of ironic because Doug Walker is not a fan of Baz Luhrmann. Baz Luhrmann's Romeo and Juliet made me understand Shakespeare better than anybody could. If there is one thing that Doug Walker has proven in his Does Romeo and Juliet Suck video, it's that man understands Shakespeare. So here's the last question, and it ties into the previous one. Why have you removed Romeo and Juliet from your list of films to be reviewed on Matthew's Favorite Movies? Well, I know a lot of people were wondering if I had changed my mind on the film over the years, if I think it's somehow less brilliant than I did before. Nothing could be further from the truth. Indeed, this is a film that I think belongs on the Matthew's Favorite Movies list. The reason I took it off is because there really isn't any reason to review Romeo and Juliet step by step in a full review. Because if you notice from the title, I was going to put this in the review, but I'll just say it here. This is the official name of the movie is William Shakespeare's Romeo and Juliet, not Baz Luhrmann's, and that not Baz Luhrmann's Romeo and Juliet. And that's very important because, truth be told, Baz Luhrmann's Romeo and Juliet is Shakespeare. It's not Baz Luhrmann's take on it. It's his own take on a few scenes and a few different things that happen in a couple of scenes. But at the core, it is Romeo and Juliet. It's the same script. It's the same everything. This is not a reinterpretation. And so if I was to fully review Romeo and Juliet, created by Baz Luhrmann, I would essentially just be reviewing Shakespeare. And that isn't really what I want to talk about with regard to that movie. I want to talk about how Baz Luhrmann took Shakespeare and made the most effective version of it that I've ever seen. What he did to make that translate to an audience without redoing the dialogue. It's still the exact same Elizabethan dialogue as you get in any of the plays. It is the play. But what he did in that film to make that translate to an audience was brilliant to me. Unfortunately, that's only going to be probably like a 5 or 6 minute review talking about that particular aspect of it. So that's why I had to remove it. There's a specific thing that I want to say about that film, and to try and review it through and through would actually take away from the point that I'm trying to make there. So it's going to be a mini view. And now that I have gotten everybody's appetite ready for that, I'll probably do the mini view pretty soon. So be on the lookout for that. So there we have it. Confused Q&A number 2. Keep sending me your questions if you have any suggestions for how I can do this better. If you think that the questions are going on for too long, maybe I should split them up. Or if you're just happy with the way things are. Once again, I'm in the beginning stages of working out how to do this, so your input is always appreciated. And continue to send more questions. I love things like this. I love being able to respond to people. I might end up putting a music intro at the beginning of this, just because that's fun for me. So if you have any suggestions of what the song should be, go ahead, why not? Put that in too. But until then, I hope you've enjoyed this, and I'll see you all next time.